Pride, Learning, and the Forest Teacher, a Buddha reflection. Sometimes I notice something uncomfortable in myself. The more I learn, the more quietly certain I become that I already understand. And in that certainty, something subtle begins to tighten. Today I want to explore a moment the Buddha revealed with extraordinary clarity. A moment when knowledge, pride, and quiet awareness met face to face in a forest monastery. It is a story about a brilliant young scholar named Ambata who came to examine the Buddha. But as the meeting unfolded, something unexpected happened. The question slowly turned inward. And what appeared was a deeper insight the Buddha often pointed to. That true wisdom does not grow from proving what we know, but from seeing clearly the movements of our own mind. The journey of certainty. Sometimes you begin a journey not with curiosity, but with certainty. You already believe you know what you will find. Perhaps you have studied for years, learned the language of wisdom, collected ideas, teachings, explanations, and slowly, almost invisibly, knowledge becomes identity. You no longer carry knowledge. Knowledge carries you. At such moments the mind grows subtly tight. There is confidence, yes, but also a quiet hardness. A sense that the world must now confirm what you already understand. Long ago, in the plains of northern India, a young scholar named Ambata set out on such a journey. He had mastered the ancient hymns. His teacher, the respected Brahmin Proprietary, had taught him the 3 Vedas completely. Rituals, grammar, sacred meanings, even the signs said to reveal a great being. Teacher and student had reached a rare point of agreement. What I know, you know. What you know, I know. For Ambata, this meant something powerful. It meant the work was finished. But the Buddha often pointed to a subtle truth. The moment you believe the path is complete, the mind quietly closes its doors. And so Ambata set out toward the forest of Ikanangala, not yet knowing that the real journey had not even begun. The weight of knowing. Knowledge can feel like light, but sometimes it sits on the mind like armor. When Ambata prepared to meet the wandering teacher known as Gautama, he carried the pride of mastery. He knew the scriptures, the ancient traditions, the marks of greatness described in sacred learning. In his mind, there were already 2 possibilities. If this man truly possessed the 32 marks spoken of in the ancient teachings, then only 2 futures could exist. Either he would become a universal monarch, ruling the world through righteousness, or he would become something even rarer, a fully awakened one. But notice what the mind does when it frames the world like this. It reduces mystery into categories. This is how the thinking mind seeks safety. The Buddha understood this deeply. The mind grasps at certainty the way a hand grasps a rope during a storm. Yet certainty can also become blindness. When you believe you already know what truth should look like, you stop seeing what is actually in front of you. And so Ambata traveled with confidence. But confidence, when unexamined, often hides a quieter tension underneath. The quiet measure. Not by learning alone does wisdom appear. Wisdom arises when the mind becomes humble enough to see. When Ambata arrived at the forest monastery, he was not entering an argument. He was entering stillness. The monks were walking quietly in the open air. The forest held the gentle rhythm of breath, wind, and footsteps. Nothing rushed. Nothing demanded attention. Ambata approached and asked where the recluse Gautama was staying. The monks looked at him carefully. They knew his reputation. A brilliant student from a respected Brahmin lineage, a master of recitation. But they also knew the Buddha. And the Buddha often welcomed conversation not to defeat a person, but to reveal the movements of the mind itself. They pointed toward a small hut. The Gandakudi. The Buddha was resting there. Their instructions were simple. Enter quietly, step softly, cough gently, and tap the bolt with your fingernail. No ceremony, no spectacle. Just attention. In this small instruction, there is something the Buddha often showed. The mind that seeks greatness sometimes overlooks the quiet doorway where understanding begins. A door opens. Ambata approached the small dwelling. The door was closed. He stepped forward quietly, entered the porch, coughed softly, and tapped the bolt with his fingernail. The door opened. The Buddha stood there. There is something striking about such moments in human life. After all the preparation, all the thinking, all the imagining, the encounter itself is often very simple. Two human beings meeting. Ambata entered, accompanied by his fellow students. Greetings were exchanged. Questions about well-being, courteous words, polite conversation. Nothing dramatic. Just presence. But presence reveals things that words cannot hide. Sometimes when we meet someone who lives with clarity, something in us becomes restless. Not because they challenge us directly, but because their stillness quietly reflects our own movement. The Buddha had no need to prove anything. He simply saw. Movement of the mind. As the conversation began, Ambata behaved in a curious way. He walked back and forth while speaking. At times he stood. Then he moved again, offering brief remarks as he paced. The body was not settled. This happens often when the mind is protecting something. Restlessness appears. Words come quickly. The body refuses to become still. The Buddha watched this gently. Not with irritation. Not with judgment. Just observation. He had spent years studying the human mind, not through books, but through direct seeing. He understood that behavior reveals inner tension the way ripples reveal movement beneath water. And so he waited. Because sometimes the clearest teaching begins not with explanation, but with a question. Insight and Awareness Quiz. After you have listened, open the quiz tab. The questions reveal how you interpreted what you heard and invite you to notice the hidden logic in your reactions. Then, share your score in the comments. The mirror of conduct. A wise person is not known by speech alone. Their conduct quietly reveals the state of their mind. At a certain moment, the Buddha spoke. His words were calm. Ambata, as you walk back and forth and stand while speaking with me in this way, is this how you speak with elderly Brahmins? With your teachers and your teachers' teachers? The question was simple. Yet inside it was a mirror. When someone truly sees us, our habits become visible to ourselves. Ambata had come to evaluate the Buddha. But now something unexpected was happening. He was being invited to look at his own mind. This is the Buddha's quiet way. He did not crush pride with force. He revealed it gently, allowing the person to recognize it themselves. And recognition is powerful, because what is seen clearly can begin to soften. The subtle edge of pride. Pride rarely feels like pride from the inside. It feels like correctness, like certainty, like the quiet conviction that you understand more than the person sitting across from you. Ambata had spent years mastering sacred knowledge. In his world, scholarship carried authority, status carried weight. Yet the Buddha saw something deeper. Learning had become identity. And identity, when protected too strongly, creates friction in the mind. This is something many people experience. A professional defending their expertise. A spiritual seeker defending their practice. A scholar defending their theory. But the Buddha noticed that truth does not grow well inside rigid certainty. Truth grows where the mind becomes curious again, where seeing matters more than being right. The forest teacher. There is a reason the Buddha often lived in forests. Forests do not argue. Trees do not compete for status. Wind moves through everything without asking permission. Ambata had come from a world of debate, tradition, and hierarchy. Here, the atmosphere was different. The monks walked slowly. Conversations were measured. Silence had value. This environment itself was a teaching. Because when the mind slows down, hidden movements appear. You begin to notice impatience. The subtle urge to dominate a conversation. The discomfort of not being the most knowledgeable person in the room. The Buddha had discovered that liberation does not require complex ideas. It begins with seeing clearly what the mind is doing right now. The turning of attention. When the mind stops defending itself, understanding quietly appears. Imagine standing before someone who is completely unthreatened by your pride. Someone who does not compete with you, yet cannot be shaken. This was the presence many people felt around the Buddha. Ambata expected debate. Instead, he encountered calm observation. The Buddha did not attack his learning. He did not dismiss the Vedas or the traditions Ambata carried. He simply revealed the state of the moment. Is this how you speak with your teachers? Suddenly the question was not about doctrine. It was about awareness. And awareness changes the entire field of conversation. When the mind becomes aware of its own behavior, something loosens. The tightness around identity begins to relax. And in that relaxation, understanding can enter. The softening of identity. Many people believe awakening requires gaining something extraordinary. But often it begins with losing something subtle. The need to be superior. The need to defend knowledge. The need to maintain a particular identity. Ambata had arrived as a scholar sent to evaluate a famous teacher. But the Buddha quietly shifted the direction of inquiry. Instead of asking, "Is this man enlightened?" the real question became something deeper. What is happening in your mind right now? This is the Buddha's method again and again. Not abstract philosophy. Direct seeing. Because suffering rarely comes from what we know. It comes from what we cling to. The courage to see. Seeing your own mind requires a special kind of courage. Not the courage of battle, but the courage of honesty. Many people can quote wisdom. Few are willing to observe themselves when pride appears, when irritation rises, when certainty tightens the chest. The Buddha invited people into this kind of courage. He showed that awareness itself is a path. You watch the mind move. You notice the moment identity forms. You see the small contraction that says, "I must be right." And slowly, with patience, that contraction softens. The Buddha did not humiliate Ambata. He offered him something rarer, the opportunity to see himself clearly. The quiet shift. Freedom begins the moment we see that the mind we defend is not truly who we are. This insight appears gradually. You begin to notice that thoughts arise and pass like clouds. Certainty appears, then fades. Pride arises, then dissolves. Even identity itself moves like weather across the sky of awareness. The Buddha discovered that clinging to these shifting states creates suffering, but observing them creates freedom. Imagine holding a cup of water very tightly. Your hand grows tired. Now imagine placing the cup gently on a table. Nothing is lost, yet the strain disappears. This is the difference between clinging and understanding. Ambata had spent years strengthening his grip on knowledge. Now the Buddha was quietly showing him the possibility of releasing it. The intelligence of humility. Humility is often misunderstood. It is not thinking less of yourself. It is simply seeing clearly that wisdom does not belong to anyone. It arises when conditions allow it. Even the Buddha described his awakening not as ownership, but as discovery. Truth was always there. The mind simply stopped obscuring it. Ambata's learning was not the problem. Learning can be beautiful. The problem was the subtle identity formed around it. I am the knower. Once that identity softens, knowledge becomes lighter. It becomes a tool rather than a shield. And when knowledge becomes light, curiosity returns. Curiosity is the doorway through which wisdom enters. The forest within. The forest of Ikanangala still exists in a symbolic way within every person. It appears whenever the mind becomes quiet enough to observe itself. You may notice it while walking alone, while breathing slowly, while listening deeply to another human being. In those moments, the mind stops rushing toward conclusions. It begins to watch. You see restlessness. You see pride. You see fear of losing identity. And gradually, you see something else. None of these movements are permanent. They arise, shift, dissolve. The Buddha discovered that freedom lives in this recognition, not in controlling the mind, but in understanding it. The door that opens. The wise do not seek victory in debate. They seek the moment when the mind becomes free. The meeting between Ambata and the Buddha began with evaluation. But it quietly became something else. A mirror. A moment where knowledge encountered awareness. The Buddha did not defeat Ambata. He simply invited him to see more deeply. And this is the quiet secret of the path. Freedom does not appear when life obeys our expectations. It appears when we see clearly how the mind creates those expectations. The moment that seeing becomes gentle and honest, something loosens. The need to prove. The need to dominate. The need to protect identity. And in that loosening, space appears. A space where understanding breathes easily. The Buddha walked this path not through force, but through clear seeing. And anyone who pauses long enough to observe their own mind can begin to notice the same doorway opening. A door that was never locked, only unnoticed. This is Buddha Reflections, where philosophy, insight, and lived experience meet to explore mind, impermanence, and release. The conversation doesn't end here. Visit the quiz tab and share your score in the comments. Thanks for your time. It's been a delight. What should we explore next? Comment, share, and save your insight. Subscribe to Orbital Dharma and keep your thoughts bright.